Welcome to the Putting Your Business on the Map podcast. My name is Landon Blake. I am your podcast host. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the podcast. If you're curious and you'd like to learn more, we have a special page for the podcast up at www.landonblake.com. Make sure you check that out. We've got our show notes there. You can also download the podcast in your favorite audio format. You should also be able to find the podcast on Spotify and on YouTube. So we've got the podcast episodes in both of those places. So if you use one of those apps or services, you can subscribe to the podcast there. Full disclaimer, I record most of these episodes at my home in Stockton, California. I am married to a crazy Mexican woman, and I have 2 dogs, so you may hear her or the dogs during the podcast episode. I just want to warn you ahead of time. I love all 3 of them, but they are noisy. So if you would like to sponsor a private recording studio for the podcast, make sure you reach out to me and let me know that. Otherwise, you may have some background noise. So with that disclaimer out of the way, we're going to jump right into today's episode. The title of today's episode is Managing Cash Flow in a Small Land Surveying Business. This is going to be pretty specific to land surveying businesses in the private sector, but it could also be applicable to folks that are working for a government agency, possibly. And also if you're running a department in a large organization, but you have to manage a budget for your department. But I'm going to tailor the content as if I'm speaking to a small business owner, a land surveyor, but could be other types of small businesses too. So this would apply. What we're going to talk about today would apply to like civil engineers, architects, geotechnical engineers, structural engineers, any kind of professional consultant in the design industry that is running a small business. So we're going to talk about cash flow today. That's one of the big 3 challenges of our first few years in business that I talked about in the very first episode. And so we're going to talk about that in depth today. I may do an individual episode on each of those 3 challenges. I haven't decided yet, but this will cover the first one. And the reason I'm doing this particular challenge is because it remains persistently one of the toughest things about running a small business. I'm not going to say that we haven't gotten better at it. I think we have, but I'm surprised at how much we still struggle with it. And certainly we've done better with the other challenges. The other 2 challenges I mentioned in that episode, we have done better with than we have with this challenge. So that's why I wanted to talk about it. I will let you guys know too that I'm trying to improve the audio quality of the podcasts. So I went back and listened to the first 2 episodes, and the audio quality is really horrible compared to the 3rd episode. I recorded the 3rd episode with some different equipment and software. So I think I'm going to go back and re-record those first 2 episodes. I was on the fence about it, but it's bad enough. I think I'm going to do that. So I'll keep you guys posted on how that progresses. And if I get some time to get that done and I get those re-recorded, I'll let you guys know so you can listen to those with some better audio. So what are we going to talk about in this episode? I want to just kind of give you an overview. So I've got 8 main points that I want to cover. 8. See if I can hold up my fingers the right way. There you go. 8. So I'm going to give you a full confession. That's the first thing. Second thing is I'm going to talk about why cash flow management is important. Third thing is I'm going to cover some definitions of some terms related to cash flow. Fourth thing I'll do is tell you how we manage cash flow at my surveying business, Redefined Horizons. There are different ways to do it. I'm going to tell you how we do it. And that'll be very specific. So that'll be something you guys can actually apply in your own business if you want. We'll talk a little bit more about why this is so hard. And I talked about that a little bit in the first episode, but we'll talk about it some more. I'll talk a little bit about who I think struggles with this in our industry. It's probably more people than you think. So I'll talk a little bit about that from my experience. I'll share a few tips and some best practices that should make managing your cash flow easier. And then we can maybe think about some other related episodes that we might talk about and cover in the future that are related to this topic of managing cash flow. So I'm going to start with my confession. So what is my confession here? Properly managing cash flow is really hard. As I mentioned, I said it's one of our top 3 challenges. It was one of the top 3 challenges in our first few years in business. I talked about that in the first episode of this podcast. It's still hard. It's still hard. So we just, in the last episode, I thought we'd been open for 5 years. We haven't. We just had our 4-year anniversary. So I apologize for those that listened to the last episode. But yeah, it's still, we're rolling on to year 4 now, and it's still hard. So cash flow is still a big challenge for us. It's definitely it's still in the top 3, and it might even be the top challenge now. So I'm still learning to do a good job of this. I don't want you guys to think that I have all the answers. I don't. I get frustrated as a business owner at the fact that this still remains a problem. I wish I didn't have to. I wish it wasn't a problem anymore. It still is, and that frustrates me. I think that illustrates why it's so hard. I give it a lot of my time and attention, and we still struggle with it. We'll talk about a few of the reasons why that is. So full confession here that you're not talking to a guy that has solved this problem or has it figured out. But I think a lot of organizations struggle with it. I think a lot of the surveying companies that I've worked for in the past have not done a good job of it. And so I want to share with you a little bit about what I have learned. But yeah, that's my confession. This is still hard, and I don't have it all figured out. And then the other thing too, as part of my confession, I just want to let you know, I'm not sure if you ever get to stop thinking about this as a small business owner. I don't know that you ever get to just like put cash flow management on autopilot. Maybe you do. Maybe at one point you have enough money in the bank, or you got a big enough line of credit where you don't have to worry about this, but I don't think that's true. I was talking to a friend of mine who owns his own surveying business. He's been in the business a long time, 20 or 25 years, and he still struggles with cash flow management too. So that's just one data point, but it may be evidence that this remains something that demands a lot of your attention as a business owner throughout the life of your business. All right, so there's my confession. That was the first point I wanted to cover. The second thing I wanted to talk about is, why is this important? It's really important. It may be one of the most important things you do. So why is that? Well, it's key to the financial health of your business. So practicing good cash flow management allows you to pay your employees on time, which is important. I mentioned in the first episode, there have been a handful of times when I've had to pay people a few days late. I don't think we've ever paid more than a week late, maybe 2 weeks late. One time I think we may have paid 2 weeks late. And that really bothers me. I hate doing that. So good cash flow management allows you to pay your people on time. That's one of the most important reasons why you want to practice good cash flow management. The other thing is it allows you to pay your own bills on time. So that, that's bills for your vendors, your sub-consultants, your landlord, your utility companies, your insurance companies. You got to pay all those people if you're running a real business. And you want to pay them on time, and we work really hard to pay our bills on time. So if you don't do a good job of cash flow management, you end up paying your bills late, and that can damage relationships. And so you want to work really hard to avoid that. The other thing, and I think this is super important, is good cash flow management significantly reduces your stress as a business owner. I would say, 50% of my stress as a business owner comes from cash flow management. So that's a significant portion. I don't think there's any other part of the business that causes me as much stress as cash flow management does. So that's pretty significant. So if you do a good job of it, hopefully your stress as a business owner will be lower. And the other thing is it will help you to avoid bankruptcy. So I've got a friend of mine. His name's Kevin. He also is a principal at a civil. He's a principal at a civil survey company. So he also runs a survey business. And he told me, I call him pretty regular just to pick his brain about running a business because he's been doing it longer than I have. And he's a smart guy. And one of the things he tells me is, Andy, you don't typically go bankrupt because you don't have any money coming in. It's not because you lack work, typically. Even work that pays. He says you go bankrupt because you don't have enough money in the bank when you need it. So it's a cash flow problem. That's what creates insolvency. And I think he's right. That's good advice that he gave me. Okay, so that's why it's important. So point number 3 of the podcast is just to cover some definitions. So I have a half a dozen that I'll go over. So in the rest of the episode, when you hear me mention these terms or phrases, I want you to know what I'm talking about. Okay, so the first one is money in the bank. What does that mean? So money is the bank is cash you've got in the bank. It's liquid assets. So it's money you can use today to pay bills. So most businesses have some assets that aren't liquid. So, that's things like your equipment and your computers and your software. Maybe you have some money invested in like a CD, certificate of deposit, or some other kind of vehicle. It may not be super liquid. You might not be able to get that money today. You may have to wait to get it. So that's not money in the bank. Money in the bank is money you can use to pay bills today. Now, I'm not telling you to keep all your money in the bank, because at some point, inflation's a real thing and there's disadvantages to that. You can, certainly the last year has taught us you don't want to have more money in one bank than the deposit limit, than the federal deposit insurance limit. So there's some things to think about there, but that's what I mean when I say money in the bank. That's money you've got in your bank account that you can use to pay bills. Another term you'll hear me say is money earned. So what is money earned? Money earned is work that you or your team has completed. It could be billed. It might not be billed, but you don't have to earn it. In other words, you've already typically paid the payroll to realize that income. So that's, in other words, you've earned the money. Now that's important for our business because we get deposits. So sometimes we'll get a deposit. I might get a $5,000 or a $10,000 or a $15,000 deposit. When we get that deposit check, we have not earned that money yet. So it's like a loan. It's like a liability. So you have to be aware. Just because you have money in the bank doesn't mean you've earned it. And that's important because when you get a deposit like that, it makes your bank account balance today look good, but you're going to have to pay the payroll to earn that money at some point. So it's not, you don't get the full dollar value of that money when it's in your bank. So money earned is money that you have earned already through payroll you've paid, basically. Future revenue, that's when we talk about revenue, that's money coming in the door. So future revenue is either work that you have under contract or high confidence proposals. It could also be regular income you get. Like maybe you have monthly fees that you get paid by a client. I don't have any work like that, but I could see how a company could have that. So that's money that's coming in the door in the future. And you have to be careful with that because high confidence proposals go sideways. Sometimes that work gets delayed. You can even have a contract canceled. But you do, part of managing cash flow is you got to make some estimates. And so you have to estimate, you got to understand you're taking some risk there with future revenue. So future revenue is your best idea of high confidence, at a high level of confidence of the money that you've got coming in the door the next, let's say 90 days. Good money. So there's good money and bad money. So when you hear me say that, what does that mean? Good money is money earned that will be paid or you're highly confident will be paid. So that's good money. So it's money you've earned, you've billed to a client or you're about to bill to a client and they're going to pay the bill. Bad money is money you've earned that will not be paid. Clients don't always pay their bills. And so sometimes you get bad money. Now, we do a good job here at RH. We have almost no bad money. It's a very small percentage of our overall revenue. So I think we do a better job of that than most companies do. And part of that's getting deposits, getting paid before we deliver, working for the right kind of client. We did have some bad money this year. And actually most of it, we had somewhere between $10,000 or $20,000 of bad money last year, 2023, which isn't bad. That's a very small percentage of our overall revenue, but some of that money was on one of my jobs. So we had a time and materials task we did for a client. I didn't get a retainer because the client was referred to us by a business partner, and I ended up not getting paid for that work. So that was bad money on one of my jobs. So it does happen. Time we're going to eat. So when you hear me say, this is time we're going to eat, what that means is you've got to pay wages to perform work, and for whatever reason, you're not going to get paid for the client. So it could be you're doing extra work for a client that isn't going to get paid, or you're over budget, but you have a contractual obligation you got to meet, and so you're going to eat the time. You're going to eat the payroll. You're going to eat that time. And then late money, that's when you have good money that's going to be late. That's late money. Bad money isn't late money because bad money's probably never coming, right? And bad money rarely ever turns into late money. But you could have good money that turns into late money, and which is not good either, but at least you're getting paid. So those are my definitions. All right. So just to review, we talked about my confession. and some definitions of terms related to cash flow management. All right, so what are we going to talk about next? Point number 4 is how do you manage cash flow? And we're going to talk about a practical way that you can do that. I'm going to share the way we do that at my business. So how do we do that? How do we manage cash flow at Redefine Horizons? So what we do is we use what I call a forward-looking ledger. You can think about it like your checkbook register. Okay, and we do it in Microsoft Excel. You could use other software to do that if you wanted. But we keep a forward-looking ledger. So it's not a traditional ledger. So a traditional business ledger, accounting ledger, looks backwards, right? It's looking at transactions you've already made. So I'm talking about what we call our cash flow management spreadsheet is a forward-looking ledger. So you're trying to look forward and predict what your actual, checking account balance is going to look like at some point in the future time. So it's not a budget, folks. It's not a budget. It is a forward-looking prediction of what your bank transactions are going to be and what your balance is in your bank account. Remember, we talked about money in the bank. So that's what it's really looking at, because the money in the bank is what is important. That's what you use to pay bills. Now, I thought I had a YouTube video that showed you guys a cash flow spreadsheet, but I checked my channel. I don't have one on there. So we will put a short, 10 or 15 minute video on our YouTube learning channel for Redefine Horizons that shows you what a cash flow spreadsheet looks like. So let me just describe it to you. You're going to want to watch the video, but let me describe to you what it looks like. So the top row has your current money in the bank balance. And then for us, that's the balance in our primary checking account. We do have more than one bank account, and we have a couple credit cards, but most of our money is in one bank. And then each row underneath that top row is either going to be a transaction that puts money in the bank or a transaction that takes money out. And for each row, you calculate the balance. That's what the balance will be, money in the bank after the transaction. And it's your best prediction of what that bank account balance is going to look like as those transactions come in and out of the bank. Now, one of the reasons we do that is that allows us to look forward and determine where we might have what we call a cash flow pinch. And I apologize, I left that out of my definition. So a cash flow pinch is when you need to pay a bill and you don't have enough money in the bank to pay. So you're getting pinched. It's not that you're insolvent. You may have that money coming that you need to pay the bill, but the bill's due today and you might not get the money till tomorrow. That's a cash flow pinch. So that's what we really use the cash flow spreadsheet to do, is we use it to try and avoid cash flow pinches. And one of the things that really helps us as principals do is be diligent about our billing. Because if we can look ahead and see a cash flow pinch, then we know, hey, we got to really jump on making sure that we hit some milestones and get some bills out, or that we can call and follow up on bills that maybe aren't paid yet. So is that tool perfect? No, it's not perfect. Why is it not perfect? You get expenses you don't expect. So that'll throw your spreadsheet off. Some of that future revenue we talked about is an estimate, and projects get delayed. Clients pay bills late. Sometimes clients don't pay bills. So I often find, I've gotten better over the last 4 years at making the cash flow spreadsheet a little more conservative. But even trying to be conservative, I find that I'm sliding payment dates in the spreadsheet. So, you don't get to slide the date of your bills, right? Those come usually at the same time every month, but you're going to find that you have to slide payment dates, which is frustrating. But work starts late. Clients don't pay on time. It happens. But if nothing else, the spreadsheet gives you an idea. It's just an estimate. It's just a prediction. It's not foolproof. But I'm surprised at the number of organizations that have no clue what their bank account balance might look like in 2 weeks. So at Redefine Horizons, we always know what our bank account balance is going to look like in 2 weeks. And by the way, all of our people have access to that. So they can get in and see the bank account balance at any time, and they can see what money's coming in and what money's coming out. We don't hide that from people. Everybody in my organization has access to that. That's part of how we're trying to be transparent. Now, I will tell you there's a limit to how useful that tool gets. As you move further and further into the future, it gets less and less reliable, right? So as a general rule, we're not typically filling that spreadsheet out past 90 days. Every once in a while, we might look ahead 4 or 5 months if we have some long-term work on the books, but you get past 90 days and it just starts to get real unreliable. So that's the tool we use. The fifth main point I wanted to talk about in this episode is, all right, even with that tool, why is this so hard? We talked about it a little bit in the first episode of the podcast, but so why is cash flow management so hard? Life happens. That's one reason. What do I mean when I say that? Your work truck breaks down. You didn't expect that. The project manager, your client, has a major medical emergency and they aren't in to approve your invoice. Bad weather delays the start of a project, so you don't get to start a project when you thought. If you don't get to start it when you thought, you don't get to finish it when you thought. Your whole team gets COVID-19 for 2 weeks. So life throws you unexpected curveballs. That's one of the reasons why cash flow management is hard. We talked about this, but clients don't pay their bills on time. That doesn't mean they're evil. Some clients are evil, but just because a client pays a bill late doesn't mean they're evil. It could be poor planning on their part. It could be that they haven't been paid by their client. So sometimes clients pay their bills late. Clients sometimes don't pay bills. We don't have that problem very often, but 3 times in 4 years, I've had a client just not pay a bill or not pay part of a bill. So that happens. The other reason this is hard is it takes regular attention, and there's a lot of elements to juggle, and it needs continuous updating. I would say I'm in our cash flow management spreadsheet 3 times a week at a minimum. Sometimes I'm in it every day, depending on what our situation is. So, and I think it takes high level involvement. I have a great bookkeeper / accountant that helps me with that. But I personally am in the cash flow spreadsheet at least 3 times a week. And my partners and I, the other 2 principals of the company, also look at it. So when you're a small business, I think it's important that the owner or the principal have his or her eyes on that information, because you're going to use that information in that spreadsheet to make decisions. So that's important. So it takes a lot of time. It's a lot of time and effort to do it well. And the other reason I think this is hard is we're not typically taught how to do this. So if you're a land surveyor or GIS person or even a civil engineer and you have a business, a lot of times you aren't taught how to run a cash. Nobody taught me how to do this. Now maybe if you have the right business background, you just happen to work at a place where you got taught this, or you went to school and you got a business degree. Maybe you've been taught this, but I worked at 5 or 6 different places and never saw anything like this. So that's another reason why this is hard. The last reason why this is difficult, cash flow management, is cash flow tends to be lumpy. And we talked about that a little bit in the first episode of the podcast. So what do I mean? Well, we talked about your bills tend to come out the same time every month, right? They're on a regular schedule, regular interval. And cash flow is just, for most consultants, cash flow is lumpy. So that means your money tends to come in big chunks. Now, there are things you can do to minimize the lumpiness of your cash flow, but I don't think you can ever eliminate it. Just as an example, I'm recording this episode at the end of January 2024. Like, we always get a what's the word I'm looking for? We don't get checks the last half of December or the first half of January because everybody's out for the holidays. So my invoices aren't getting approved. People aren't at work. And then we almost always get a big pile of money at the end of January. I don't know if there's anything you can do about that. That's just part of how the economy works in America. Everybody is off work the last 2 weeks of December. So it's hard to get bills paid. So that we have done that every year for 4 years. I end up with a cash flow pinch in the middle of January because it's hard to get bills paid in the end of December and the first part of January. Okay, so next we're going to cover the main point number 6 and number 7. So that is who in our profession or industry struggles with this, and just a few tips to help you manage cash flow besides running the cash flow management spreadsheet. So who in civil engineering and land surveying struggle with this problem, cash flow management? The answer is everyone. Everyone struggles with it. Now, if they tell you they've got it all figured out, they're probably lying. Now, why do I say that? Well, I've worked at some big companies, and I know folks in some big companies, and I consistently hear stories about people that struggle with, those organizations, even large organizations that struggle with cash flow. So I heard a story a few months ago about a pretty big civil survey firm in my area that had almost $1 million in accounts receivable. So that was money they were owed, and it was causing a cash flow pinch. That was a pretty regular thing at one of the other big engineering companies I worked for. My boss and I were in monthly meetings, and he was always getting his butt chewed for having way too much money racked up in bills that were either 60 days or 90 days or over 90 days late. So I think everybody struggles with it. Now, bigger companies will oftentimes have a cash flow cushion or a big line of credit with a bank, which makes this easier. But I think they still have to. It still causes headaches, I think. So big companies are not an exception. So I think it's more of a problem for small companies, but everybody deals with it. So if they tell you they don't have to worry about it, they're either lying or they're not the person at the organization that has to make sure the paychecks get run and will cash. So it could just be you're not talking to the right person in the organization. That could be a problem too. All right. So what are some tips and best practices for managing cash flow? I have a few written down here. Don't forget, keep that cash flow management spreadsheet. Remember, that's a forward-looking ledger. That's a really important tool we use. I'll get a YouTube video up that shows you how to do that. The other thing that we do a really good job of at RH that I know almost nobody else in our industry does is we ask for deposits and retainers. And that deserves its own episode. But typically, if you're a new client coming to us, we're going to ask for a 50% deposit and payment on full before we deliver. We will occasionally make an exception for that, but it doesn't happen very often. And me and my partners and I are doing it less and less as we spend more time in business. We're making exceptions to that rule less because not every time, but frequently when we make an exception, we regret it. So deposits and retainers and payment on delivery will help smooth out your lumpiness of your cash flow, which is important. We also stop work for clients that are seriously late paying their bills. It's hard to do that. Those are difficult conversations. Sometimes you just have to call a client up and say, I'm going to stop work until I get my bill paid. And my experience is even when clients get upset, what usually happens after that is your bill gets paid. So you have to do that sometimes. Another thing that will help is be careful with the debt you take on. I think most companies that get into serious financial trouble or go insolvent in our profession or industry, the root cause of that is too much debt. And why? Why do companies do that? That's a whole nother episode, but the main reason why is they're taking on debt to pursue growth. A lot of times that growth is not high quality growth. It's low quality growth. So that's something we've worked really hard to try and avoid here at Redefine Horizons. We have almost no debt. We have a very small amount of debt. But we basically run the business on the money we bring in the door every month, which is part of the reason why cash flow management is so important at our organization. So be careful with your debt. Let's see. Sorry. Let me go back to my notes here. So you want to be careful with your debt. You want to also carefully consider payment terms and payment frequency when you're evaluating new clients' projects and you're negotiating contract terms. So I always look at the first two things I look at when I'm negotiating a contract are the indemnification limitations of liability, that clause or clauses, and I look at the payment terms. So I'm amazed at how many people, and it's usually civil engineers, but or architects will call up here and want me to do $50,000 or $100,000 worth of work on net 90 payment terms. That's almost impossible for a small business, and we don't do it. I don't do net 90. Almost never. Not for that kind of dollar value. And that means we don't work for some clients. And that's okay. I had a large civil engineering company call here and they wanted me to take on a $30,000 job. It was net 90 payment terms. That particular client had been almost 7 or 8 months late paying a previous bill of $25,000. I told them I wouldn't do it. I said, I'm not going to take another $30,000 to work for you guys. Net 90 and then have you pay me 4 months after that. So we didn't get the job. And that's okay. I don't think I needed it. So you got to carefully consider your payment terms. So all those things will help you manage your cash flow as a small business. So why is cash flow management important? We're just going to review the main points from the episode now. So why is it important? It's a key factor in the financial health of your business, right? You want to be able to pay your people on time, and you want to be able to pay your vendors and your subs on time. We talked about some key terms, right? Money in the bank, money earned, good money, bad money. So all those terms are important. You need to understand what they mean. I told you one way to manage your cash flows, to keep that forward-looking ledger, right, or checkbook register. And we do that, and I'll do a video. I promise I'll do a YouTube video that shows you that. We talked a little bit about why it was hard. I gave you 5 or 6 reasons why it's hard. Cash flow management is hard. There's good reasons why it's hard. So it's not hard because you're dumb. It's hard because it's hard. It's an inherently hard thing to do. And then we offered you a few tips or best practices on how you can make your cash flow less lumpy and do a better job of managing that. So what are we going to talk about in the next episode? I'm going to answer this question. Should you outsource your CAD drafting? So that should be an interesting episode. I hope I get, 2 or 3 or 5 offers a week from offshore companies to outsource our CAD work. So why would that be a good idea or a bad idea? When should you do it? We'll talk a little bit about that in the next episode. So if you like the podcast, don't forget, subscribe, like and share the episode on social media. And I hope you guys enjoyed learning a little bit about how to manage cash flow. That's going to wrap up our episode for today. Once again, I want to thank you guys for listening. Appreciate that. Don't forget, you can check out the podcast, download episodes, view show notes at www.landonblake.com. You can also subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast or you have a suggestion for a future topic for an episode, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can find my contact information all over the web. Landon Blake, I'd love to hear from you, and we will catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks.